We could never predict his behavior on a given day.
For decades, Jerry Lewis was celebrated as one of the most influential comedians in American entertainment. A performer whose wild energy and fearless physical comedy helped reshape what audiences found funny. But after his death, some of his own sons began speaking publicly about the man they remembered behind closed doors. And their version of Jerry Lewis was far more complicated and far darker than the beloved image millions of fans had grown up watching.
He wanted nothing to do with me.
In some circles, Lewis is considered one of the architects of modern comedy. He pushed physical humor to extremes, experimented with characters and voices, and influenced generations of entertainers who followed him. In many ways, he walked so later comedians could run. Yet the private life behind that enormous career was anything but simple. Beneath the laughter, fame, and carefully maintained public persona were strained relationships, personal contradictions, and secrets that would become increasingly difficult to ignore.
I knew I wasn't going to get anything, but the real sticking point, the dagger in my heart, is for the grandchildren.
Jerry Lewis was born on March 16, 1926, into a Jewish family deeply connected to entertainment. His father, Danny Levitch, was the son of immigrants from the Russian Empire and worked as a vaudeville performer, while his mother, Rachel, was a pianist whose family came from Warsaw. Show business was therefore never far away from Jerry's childhood. From an early age, he developed the impulsive, mischievous personality that would eventually become central to his comedy. As a teenager, Lewis loved playing pranks and creating mostly harmless trouble. But behind that restless behavior was already a desire to entertain people. One of his earliest routines became known as the record act. The idea was remarkably simple. Lewis would stand on stage and dramatically mime the lyrics of popular songs while a record played in the background. There was no elaborate set and no complicated material. The humor came almost entirely from his expressions, movements, and ability to turn an ordinary song into a physical performance. By the age of 15, Lewis had managed to secure a professional engagement in Buffalo. It should have been an exciting beginning, but the act failed to catch on. More bookings did not immediately follow, and for a time it appeared that his entertainment career might end almost as quickly as it had begun.
My father taught me about the importance of respecting your audience.
Lewis temporarily stepped away from performing and took whatever work he could find. He sold soda and worked as an usher in New York theaters, watching other performers entertain audiences while his own ambitions remained uncertain. Then a connection from his father's vaudeville years changed his direction. Max Coleman, an old friend of Danny's, encouraged the young Lewis not to abandon performing. Lewis listened. He returned to the stage and began working throughout the Borscht Belt, the collection of Catskills resorts that had become enormously popular with Jewish vacationers and an important proving ground for comedians and entertainers. Those resorts gave Lewis something he desperately needed: audiences. Night after night, he could experiment, fail, adjust his routines, and discover exactly what made people laugh. During this period, Irving Kay saw Lewis perform, recognized his potential, and became his manager. But while Lewis was building his career, the world around him was being transformed by war. For countless young American men in the 1940s, military service interrupted careers, relationships, and ordinary life. Lewis followed a different path. A heart murmur prevented him from serving in the U.S. military, leaving him free to continue performing.
It was not an Ozzie and Harriet life.
During those years, he met singer Patty Palmer. With both of them connected to entertainment, the attraction seemed natural. They married on October 3, 1944. The couple later adopted a son in 1949 and eventually had 5 biological sons during the 1950s. From the outside, Jerry Lewis appeared to be building the kind of life Hollywood loved to sell: a rising entertainer, a wife, children, and increasingly promising prospects. But appearances would prove dangerously misleading. As Lewis became more successful, pressures inside his marriage began growing as well. The bigger his public persona became, the more complicated his private world seemed to become.
Don't walk out on that stage believing they'll be there because you're there. Bull.
Only about a year after marrying Patty, the 19-year-old Lewis was performing at New York City's Glass Hat Club. Another young entertainer was appearing there too, Dean Martin. Martin was 27, handsome, relaxed, and still years away from becoming one of America's most recognizable singers. The two men crossed paths, but the partnership that would eventually make them famous did not immediately begin. It would take roughly another 2 years before circumstances finally pushed them onto the same stage. Lewis was performing at the 500 Club in Atlantic City when a singer scheduled to appear became unavailable. Suddenly, the club had a hole in its lineup and needed somebody to fill it. Lewis thought he knew exactly who could do it. He suggested Dean Martin. Today, knowing what came afterward, the decision almost feels inevitable. Martin and Lewis would eventually become one of the biggest comedy partnerships in American entertainment, drawing enormous crowds and creating a phenomenon that transformed both of their lives. At first, Martin and Lewis were anything but brilliant. Their early performances were so rough that Skinny Diamato, the owner of Atlantic City's 500 Club, reportedly gave them a blunt warning: improve the act or get out. Their partnership had barely begun, and already they were facing the possibility of failure. They needed something different, and they needed it quickly. What they eventually discovered was that their greatest strength wasn't carefully written material at all. It was chaos. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin possessed an unusual chemistry that came alive when they stopped following the script and started reacting to each other. Instead of relying on rehearsed jokes, they began improvising.
And you go out on that stage for one purpose. It's to entertain that audience.
Martin would attempt to perform as the smooth, sophisticated singer, while Lewis interrupted him, disrupted the act, made faces, caused trouble, and turned the entire performance into unpredictable comedy. Suddenly, everything clicked. The audience loved watching Martin struggle to maintain his composure, while Lewis seemed determined to destroy the show around him. Their contrasting personalities became the joke itself. Martin was calm, handsome, and effortless. Lewis was frantic, childish, and completely unpredictable. Together, they created something neither man could have achieved alone. Once they discovered that formula, Martin and Lewis became almost unstoppable. They toured venues along the East Coast, building larger audiences before eventually reaching New York's famous Copacabana. Their reputation spread quickly, and entertainment executives began paying attention. In 1948, NBC brought them to radio with the Martin and Lewis Show, which would remain on the air until 1953.
Emotional abuse, it was every day.
Around the same period, Ed Sullivan was launching his television variety program, Toast of the Town. Martin and Lewis appeared on its first broadcast, placing the young comedy team in front of a rapidly expanding national audience. Television seemed like the obvious next step. By April 1949, they were attempting to translate their growing popularity into a show of their own. With successful nightclub appearances and a radio program already behind them, expectations were high. But television exposed a problem: the wild interruptions and frantic energy that worked beautifully in crowded nightclubs and could be imagined by radio listeners didn't immediately translate to the television screen.
In the highest echelon of Hollywood, the highest. My father was the top box office draw on planet Earth.
Early reactions were disappointing. Once again, Martin and Lewis found themselves having to prove that their strange partnership could survive in a new medium. Fortunately for them, Hollywood was waiting. Paramount signed Martin and Lewis to a movie contract in 1949. Their first major appearance together came in My Friend Irma, starring Marie Wilson and Diana Lynn. Martin and Lewis were originally part of the supporting ensemble, brought in largely to provide music and comedy. But audiences immediately responded to them. The chemistry that had rescued them at the 500 Club worked on the big screen too. Hollywood quickly realized what it had. Over the following years, Martin and Lewis became one of the most commercially powerful comedy teams in America, appearing together in a string of successful movies. Between 1950 and 1956 alone, they would make 14 films together, transforming both men from nightclub entertainers into major movie stars. But success also revealed another side of Jerry Lewis.
Do I let my mother go on the street, or do I sue my father?
The result for Anthony? Disinheritance.
Around 1950, a young performer named Sammy Petrillo was attempting to establish himself in entertainment. Petrillo was 8 years younger than Lewis and bore an uncanny resemblance to him. For most successful entertainers, an imitator might have been little more than an annoyance. Lewis apparently saw something more threatening. Petrillo later recalled an uncomfortable encounter with Lewis after being hired to portray a baby in a sketch for the Colgate Comedy Hour. According to Petrillo's account, Lewis behaved abrasively toward him. Petrillo was eventually persuaded to sign with MCA, the same powerful talent agency associated with Lewis. But according to Petrillo, the promised opportunities never materialized. He came to believe that Lewis had not brought him into the agency to advance his career, but to control it, to keep a potential competitor under contract and away from opportunities that might allow him to become successful. Because Petrillo was still a minor, his father was eventually able to get him released from the agreement. Petrillo refused to disappear. In the early 1950s, he teamed with singer Duke Mitchell. Their act deliberately resembled the Martin and Lewis formula, with Mitchell filling the smooth singer role while Petrillo played the manic comic.
I'm really sorry that I didn't have any one-on-one time with him to express that I love him.
Lewis reportedly hated the imitation, and Petrillo later claimed that Lewis used his growing influence in the entertainment industry to make finding work more difficult for the pair. Meanwhile, a much larger problem was developing inside Lewis's original partnership. By the spring of 1956, the relationship between Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis was deteriorating badly. The more successful the duo became, the more attention seemed to concentrate on Lewis. Reviewers frequently treated Jerry as the comic genius of the partnership, while Martin was dismissed as little more than the handsome singer standing beside him. For Martin, the imbalance became increasingly difficult to tolerate. Then came an incident that seemed to symbolize everything that had gone wrong. In 1954, Look magazine prepared a cover photograph featuring both Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. But when the issue appeared, Martin was gone. The photograph had been cropped so that only Lewis remained. Imagine spending years building one of the biggest entertainment acts in America alongside another man, only to open a major magazine and discover that you had literally been cut out of the picture. For Martin, it was another humiliation, and their already strained relationship moved closer to the breaking point. By the time they filmed Hollywood or Bust, their final movie together, the friendship behind the partnership had largely collapsed. The production was reportedly miserable, with the two stars barely functioning as the inseparable team audiences believed them to be. After filming ended, they still had previously scheduled appearances to fulfill at the Copacabana. Those performances became their farewell. Exactly 10 years after their partnership began, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis performed together for the final time. One of the most successful comedy teams in American entertainment was finished. For the first time in a decade, Jerry Lewis stood alone. From the outside, this should have been his moment. He had fame, money, Hollywood connections, and millions of fans. Critics had spent years calling him the genius of the partnership. If anyone was supposedly prepared to thrive without the other, it was Jerry. But once Dean Martin was actually gone, something unexpected happened. Jerry Lewis lost his confidence. And suddenly, the man everyone had called the talented one had to discover whether he could survive without the partner who had spent years standing in his shadow. Not long after the breakup with Dean Martin, Jerry Lewis found himself facing one of the most important tests of his career. He and his wife were vacationing in Las Vegas when Lewis received an unexpected call from Sid Luft, Judy Garland's husband and manager. Garland had come down with strep throat and was unable to perform. Luft needed someone who could step in at the last minute and save the show. He wanted Jerry Lewis. For Lewis, the timing could hardly have been more intimidating. He had spent a decade sharing the stage with Martin, relying on the chemistry between them to create the act audiences loved. Now he was being asked to walk onto a Las Vegas stage completely alone. Lewis was reportedly hesitant, but the opportunity forced him to confront the question hanging over his career. Could Jerry Lewis entertain an audience without Dean Martin beside him? The answer came almost immediately. Lewis stepped onto that stage, performed on his own, and received an overwhelming response. The audience embraced him, and for a performer whose confidence had been shaken by the breakup, the reaction was exactly what he needed. Lewis suddenly had proof that people weren't simply coming to see Martin and Lewis. They were willing to come see Jerry Lewis. That night helped launch the next chapter of his career. Lewis recorded versions of the songs he had performed in Las Vegas, eventually securing a record deal. He also began appearing regularly at the Sands Hotel and Casino, establishing himself as a successful solo nightclub performer. Live performances would remain an important part of his career for decades. The fear that he couldn't survive without Martin began to disappear. Lewis appeared in television specials, hosted the Academy Awards 3 times between 1956 and 1959, and remained under contract with Paramount, where he began starring in movies without his former partner. Then, in 1959, he negotiated an extraordinary new deal. The contract gave Lewis an unusual degree of creative control over his films and reportedly made him the highest-paid performer in Hollywood at the time. Jerry Lewis was no longer simply the wild comedian standing beside Dean Martin. He was becoming one of the most powerful entertainers in Hollywood. Then, in 1960, a scheduling problem at Paramount gave Lewis an opportunity to prove just how much he could do behind the camera. Lewis had already filmed Cinderfella, originally intended for a summer release. Paramount executives decided the movie would perform better during the Christmas season and postponed it. But delaying the film created an unexpected hole in the studio's release schedule. Paramount needed another movie quickly. Lewis responded with an ambitious solution, The Bellboy. He wouldn't simply star in the film. Lewis directed it, co-wrote it, and produced it as well. The schedule was brutal. During the day, Lewis worked on the movie. At night, he continued performing before live audiences in Las Vegas. There simply wasn't time to make a conventional dialogue-heavy Hollywood production, so Lewis designed The Bellboy around the thing he understood better than almost anyone, physical comedy. The movie relied heavily on visual jokes and relatively little dialogue, allowing production to move at remarkable speed. But Lewis introduced something else that would prove even more significant. Rather than waiting for processed film footage to determine whether a scene had worked, Lewis used video monitors on set so he could immediately review what had just been recorded. If something needed to be changed, he could recognize the problem while the actors' equipment and sets were still in place. This early use of video playback helped popularize a technique that would eventually become standard practice in filmmaking. Paramount executives, however, were not immediately convinced by Lewis's unusual project. With so little dialogue, they reportedly worried about what kind of movie he was actually making and withdrew their financial backing. Lewis refused to abandon it. He put his own money into completing The Bellboy, effectively betting on himself when the studio would not. This time, the gamble paid off. The film became a financial success and eventually developed into one of Lewis's best-known solo movies. More importantly, it demonstrated that he wasn't merely a performer. He could write, direct, produce, and shape an entire production around his own comedic instincts. From that point forward, Lewis maintained substantial creative involvement in many of his films. Sometimes he wrote, sometimes he directed or produced. Frequently, he did several jobs at once. The young comedian who had once struggled to get bookings had transformed himself into a genuine Hollywood powerhouse. But success couldn't completely erase his past. No matter how much Jerry Lewis accomplished as a solo performer, the shadow of Dean Martin remained. Their decade together had defined both men, and the bitterness surrounding their breakup lingered for years. Lewis later said that he and Martin went roughly 2 decades without speaking privately, something he eventually admitted he deeply regretted. Publicly, however, there were occasional moments when the wall between them seemed to crack. The most famous came in 1976. Lewis was hosting his annual Labor Day telethon for the Muscular Dystrophy Association when Frank Sinatra walked onto the stage. Sinatra had arranged a surprise that Lewis apparently wasn't expecting. Then Dean Martin appeared. The audience erupted. For a moment, 2 men who had once been inseparable stood together again after years of distance. The reunion was awkward, emotional, funny, and unmistakably genuine. Whatever pain remained between them, the sight of Martin and Lewis together again became one of the most memorable moments in television history. In the end, Dean Martin was one relationship Jerry Lewis managed to repair before time completely ran out. But when it came to the people waiting for him at home, his wife and especially his children, the story would be very different. And the accusations that eventually emerged from his own family would reveal a side of Jerry Lewis that audiences had never seen on stage. For all of Jerry Lewis's enormous professional success, his private life remained deeply troubled. His infidelities were hardly a secret, yet somehow his first marriage survived for nearly 4 decades. Eventually, however, Patty Palmer reached her limit. In 1980, after years of strain, she filed for divorce, bringing one of the longest and most complicated chapters of Lewis's personal life toward its end. Around that same period, Lewis met Sandy Pitnick, a professionally trained dancer who had also worked as a flight attendant. Pitnick landed a small dancing role in Lewis's film Hardly Working, and their relationship soon became much more than professional. Lewis and Pitnick married in February 1983, beginning a completely new family life for the comedian. In the early 1990s, the couple adopted a daughter, Danielle. But while Lewis embraced this new chapter, his relationship with the 6 sons from his first marriage remained painfully fractured. Those divisions would follow the family for the rest of his life and become impossible to ignore after his death. By then, Lewis had already spent decades battling serious health problems. His first heart attack reportedly came in 1960 when he was only 34 years old. He survived another in 1982 and suffered another major cardiac episode in 2006. His health struggles also included other serious medical issues over the years, yet Lewis repeatedly recovered and returned to public life. Against those odds, he lived to the age of 91. Jerry Lewis died on August 20th, 2017, with cardiovascular disease cited as the cause. His death immediately produced an enormous wave of tributes. Comedians, actors, filmmakers, and fans remembered the performer who had spent decades pushing physical comedy into strange and unpredictable territory. But alongside the praise came renewed scrutiny, and some of the most painful criticism came from inside his own family. Patty Palmer had spent nearly 4 decades married to Lewis, and together they had raised 6 sons. Yet when Lewis's estate became public, one final decision revealed just how deep the family division had become. Lewis explicitly excluded his sons and their descendants from his will. The bulk of his estate was left to his second wife, Sandy, with their adopted daughter positioned as the next beneficiary. It was an extraordinary ending to an already fractured relationship. After Lewis died, some of his children spoke more openly about what they claimed life with their famous father had actually been like. His son Anthony described a household where the children could never be certain which version of their father would walk through the door. He characterized Lewis as unpredictable and emotionally abusive, and yet Anthony's recollections were complicated. Despite the pain he described, there was still a degree of affection for his father. His older brother, Gary Lewis, was far less forgiving. Gary publicly described his father in extraordinarily harsh terms, portraying him as cruel and emotionally distant. According to Gary, the warmth millions of people believed they saw in Jerry Lewis on television was not what his children experienced at home. The contrast was difficult to ignore. To audiences, Jerry Lewis was the man willing to humiliate himself for a laugh. He twisted his face, threw his body across stages, created ridiculous voices, and behaved with almost childlike abandon. But according to some members of his own family, the atmosphere behind closed doors could be entirely different. And the controversies surrounding Lewis did not end with his family. In 2022, Vanity Fair published allegations from several women who had worked with Lewis during his Hollywood career. They accused him of inappropriate behavior, ranging from verbal mistreatment and harassment to allegations of sexual assault. The accounts concerned alleged incidents from decades earlier, and Lewis, having died 5 years before the article appeared, was unable to respond to them. The allegations added another disturbing layer to the debate surrounding his legacy. That leaves Jerry Lewis as one of those entertainment figures whose story becomes more complicated the closer you examine it. His personal behavior has been sharply criticized by family members and former colleagues. His relationships were often turbulent. His partnership with Dean Martin collapsed at the height of their success. His sons described wounds that fame and fortune could never repair. Yet his influence on comedy remains enormous. Lewis belonged to a generation when mainstream comedy could still feel carefully controlled and predictable. He attacked those boundaries with noise, movement, exaggerated expressions, strange voices, physical destruction, and a willingness to make himself look completely ridiculous. Nothing had to remain dignified. Nothing had to remain realistic. If destroying the normal rules of behavior made the audience laugh, Lewis was willing to do it. That approach helped influence generations of performers who came afterward. Comedians, including Steve Martin and Jim Carrey, have acknowledged his importance, while Lewis's extreme physical style helped establish a language of comedy that could be seen in countless performers who followed. After Lewis died, Jim Carrey offered a particularly fitting description of that influence, remembering him as someone whose comedy stretched reality until it became almost anarchic. And perhaps that contradiction is the only way to understand Jerry Lewis. He could be innovative and destructive, generous in one part of his life and deeply hurtful in another. He spent decades making strangers laugh, while some of the people closest to him carried painful memories of the man behind the performance. Jerry Lewis helped change American comedy forever, but the man behind the laughter was far more complicated than the legend audiences saw on screen. And once his family finally began telling their side of the story, that carefully polished image could never look quite the same again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like the video, leave a comment below with your thoughts on Jerry Lewis and his complicated legacy, and subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's golden era. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.